Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that everything you know about human history is wrong. Not slightly off, not a little incomplete, but fundamentally, catastrophically wrong. What if I told you that right now, at this very moment, there are structures standing on our planet that should not exist, buildings that could not have been built by the primitive cave dwellers we learned about in school, technologies that vanished without explanation, and an entire chapter of human civilization that someone or something erased from our collective memory? This is not science fiction. This is not conspiracy theory for the sake of conspiracy. This is about following the evidence wherever it leads, even when it leads somewhere uncomfortable, somewhere that challenges everything we have been taught. Let me show you something that will change how you see the past forever. In 1994, a Turkish shepherd was walking across a barren hillside in southeastern Turkey. He noticed some strange stones jutting from the earth. When archaeologists arrived, they expected to find maybe another village, perhaps a few thousand years old. What they uncovered instead was Göbekli Tepe, and it shattered our understanding of human history. This place is not just old, it is 11,600 years old. To put that in perspective, Göbekli Tepe was built 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 6,000 years before the pyramids of Egypt, 6,000 years before humans were supposed to have the knowledge, organization, or technology to build anything like this. These were not simple stone circles. These were massive T-shaped pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, carved with sophisticated artistic reliefs of animals, geometric patterns, and symbols we still cannot fully decode. The precision of the stonework rivals anything we could produce today. And here is what really keeps archaeologists awake at night. Whoever built Göbekli Tepe deliberately buried it. They filled the entire complex with dirt and walked away, preserving it perfectly for over 11 millennia. Why would an advanced society intentionally bury their greatest achievement? What were they trying to hide? Or perhaps, what were they trying to protect for future generations to find? But Göbekli Tepe is just the beginning. In 1513, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis created a map. Today, that map sits in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, and it presents an impossible problem. The Piri Reis map shows the coastline of Antarctica, not the ice-covered Antarctica we know today, but the actual bedrock coastline beneath the ice. The contours, the bays, the geographic features, all match perfectly with modern surveys done using ground-penetrating radar. Here's the problem. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, and it has been covered in ice for at least 6,000 years, possibly much longer. So how did Piri Reis, in 1513, create a map showing details of a continent that would not be discovered for another 300 years, depicting coastlines that have been hidden under a mile of ice for millennia? Piri Reis himself wrote on the map that he compiled it from much older source maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great or even earlier. Someone, thousands of years ago, mapped Antarctica when it was free of ice. Someone had the technology, the ships, and the navigational knowledge to explore and chart the entire world, and then that knowledge disappeared. Let us talk about another impossibility. In 1901, sponge divers off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera discovered a shipwreck. Among the artifacts was a corroded lump of bronze that would become one of the most mysterious objects ever found. When researchers carefully examined it, they realized they were looking at a machine, a sophisticated mechanical computer with dozens of precisely cut bronze gears. The Antikythera mechanism, as it came to be known, was built around 100 BC, but its level of technological sophistication would not be seen again until the 1400s, over 14 centuries later. This device could predict solar eclipses, track the Olympic Games cycle, and calculate the positions of planets with astonishing accuracy. Modern scientists using X-ray computed tomography and cutting-edge scanning technology have studied this mechanism for decades, and they are still discovering new functions. Here is what should terrify you. We cannot fully replicate it, even today, using the tools that should have been available to ancient Greek craftsmen. The precision of the gear cutting, the complexity of the differential mechanisms, the astronomical knowledge required to design it. This represents a level of technological achievement that should not exist in the ancient world. And if this one device survived by pure chance, discovered only because a sponge diver happened to find a shipwreck, How much other technology was lost? How many other impossible machines crumbled to dust, melted down, or still lie buried beneath our cities? The evidence keeps piling up, doesn't it? But nobody wants to talk about what it means. Because admitting that these things exist, that they are real and verified by science, means admitting that the neat timeline we have built for human history is deeply flawed. We are told that civilization began around 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, that before this, humans were simple hunter-gatherers, barely scraping by, living in caves and banging rocks together. But Göbekli Tepe alone destroys that narrative, and it is not alone. All across the planet, we are finding evidence of advanced construction techniques, astronomical knowledge, mathematical precision, and organized societies that existed thousands of years before they should have. The deeper we dig, the older things get, and the more sophisticated they become. What happened 12,000 years ago? Why does human civilization seem to restart suddenly, almost like someone hit the reset button on our species? And why do cultures separated by thousands of miles and vast oceans all share the same stories about a great flood, a catastrophic event that destroyed an earlier world? More than 200 cultures around the globe have flood legends. The Sumerians had Ziusudra, the Hebrews had Noah, the Greeks had Deucalion, the Hindus described Manu surviving a world-destroying deluge. The Chinese, the Maya, the Aztecs, the Inca, indigenous tribes in North America, Australia, and Polynesia. All of them, independently, tell stories of an advanced civilization destroyed by water and a handful of survivors who carried the knowledge of the old world into the new. Are these just myths, primitive attempts to explain natural disasters? Or are they the fragmented memories of something real, something that actually happened, passed down through countless generations until they became legend? Before we go deeper into this mystery, I want to take just a moment. If you are finding this journey as fascinating as I am, if these questions are making you look at history differently, I would love for you to join our community here at Tales Before Tesla. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we are just getting started. There are so many more mysteries, so many more impossible artifacts and forgotten technologies waiting to be explored. And I promise you, what comes next is going to challenge everything you thought you knew. Now, let us get back to the evidence, because what we have covered so far is just scratching the surface. The real question is not whether advanced civilizations existed before recorded history. The evidence is overwhelming that they did. The real question is what happened to them. And more importantly, why has this evidence been ignored, dismissed, or actively suppressed by mainstream academia for so long? Because here is the uncomfortable truth. If we accept that these artifacts are real, if we acknowledge that the dating is accurate and the technology is genuine, then we have to rewrite the entire human story. We have to admit that we are not the first, that we are not the pinnacle, that everything we have achieved, someone else achieved before us, and then it was all lost. Let us play a game. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine you are an archaeologist in 1850. You are standing at the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza, marveling at its construction. Then someone tells you that on the other side of the planet, in the jungles of Central America, there are other pyramids. Not just similar pyramids, nearly identical pyramids, built with the same techniques, the same astronomical alignments, the same mathematical precision. Your first question would be obvious. How is that possible? Because in 1850, we believed these civilizations never met. They were separated by thousands of miles of ocean, no contact, no communication, no shared knowledge. And yet, they built the same things. Now, open your eyes, because that is not a thought experiment, that is our reality. And the more we look, the stranger it gets. The Great Pyramid at Giza was not just a tomb. Let us be clear about that right now. This structure, built supposedly around 2500 BC, with copper tools and wooden sledges, contains mathematical constants that would not be officially discovered for thousands of years. The ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height, 2 times pi. The exact value, the speed of light in meters per second, 299,792,458. The coordinates of the Great Pyramid, 29.979245, 8 degrees north. Coincidence? Maybe. Let us keep going. The pyramid is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60ths of a single degree. Modern engineers with GPS and laser theodolites struggle to achieve that level of precision. The blocks, some weighing 70 tons, are fitted together so perfectly that you cannot slide a piece of paper between them. No mortar. Just stone on stone, cut and placed with a tolerance measured in fractions of millimeters. Now let us hop across the Atlantic Ocean to Peru. At Sacsayhuaman, just outside Cusco, there are walls built from stones that weigh over 200 tons. Not 20 tons like Göbekli Tepe, 200 tons. These massive blocks are cut at multiple angles, fitted together like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. The Inca, who we credit with building these walls, had no written language, no iron tools, and supposedly no knowledge of the wheel. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 1500s, they asked the Inca who built these walls. The Inca replied that they did not know. They said the walls were already ancient when their civilization began. They called the builders the Viracocha, godlike beings who came before. The cutting technique at Sacsayhuaman is identical to the cutting technique at sites in Egypt, thousands of miles apart. No contact, same technology. Let us go further. To the island of Java in Indonesia, there stands Gunung Padang, a massive pyramid mountain that recent ground-penetrating radar surveys suggest might be the oldest structure on Earth. We are talking potentially 25,000 years old. The construction technique? You guessed it. Massive polygonal stones, precisely fitted without mortar. Do you see the pattern forming? This is not about one anomaly. This is about a global fingerprint. In the 1970s, a professor named Alexander Thom studied megalithic sites across Britain and France. He discovered something remarkable. These ancient stone circles, built supposedly by disconnected tribes, all used the same unit of measurement. He called it the megalithic yard, roughly 2.72 feet. This unit appears at Stonehenge, at Avebury, at the Standing Stones of Carnac, at sites across Scotland and Ireland. But here is where it gets interesting. That same unit of measurement, or something suspiciously close to it, appears at ancient sites in Egypt, in South America, even in North America, different continents, different time periods according to mainstream dating. Same measuring system. How do isolated cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, independently arrive at the same unit of measurement? They do not. That is the answer nobody wants to say out loud. Now, let me tell you about something that should be impossible. In the 1970s and 80s, German toxicologist Svetlana Balabanova was conducting routine tests on Egyptian mummies. She was testing for common preservatives and compounds. What she found sent shockwaves through the scientific community. She found cocaine and nicotine. Now, before you think the mummies had a drug problem, let me explain. Cocaine comes from coca plants. Those plants are native only to South America. Nicotine comes from tobacco, also native to the Americas. These substances did not exist in Africa, Europe, or Asia until after Columbus reached the New World in 1492. So, how did cocaine and nicotine get into Egyptian mummies that were 3,000 years old? The scientific establishment went into full damage control mode. They claimed contamination. They questioned her methods. They dismissed her findings. But Balabanova was not some amateur. She repeated the tests. She used fresh samples. Other labs confirmed her results. The cocaine and nicotine were there, embedded in the tissue, impossible to fake or contaminate. The only logical explanation? Transoceanic trade. Regular contact between the Americas and the Old World thousands of years before Columbus. Ships crossing the Atlantic and Pacific, carrying goods, knowledge, and yes, even drugs. But we are told that is impossible. Ancient peoples did not have the ships or navigation skills for such voyages, except they clearly did. The Phoenicians were sailing around Africa in 600 BC. Polynesian sailors were navigating thousands of miles of open ocean using only the stars and wave patterns. The Vikings reached North America 500 years before Columbus. If these civilizations could do it, why not others? Why not an earlier, more advanced maritime culture that we have not yet recognized? Let us talk about Plato for a minute. Around 360 BC, this Greek philosopher wrote about a place called Atlantis. He described it in remarkable detail, an island civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. A sophisticated society with advanced engineering, powerful military, and a concentric ring structure. For centuries, people have dismissed Atlantis as myth, as philosophical allegory. But Plato insisted, repeatedly, that this was a true history passed down from Egyptian priests. He even gave a specific date for its destruction, 9,000 years before his time. That puts the destruction of Atlantis at roughly 9600 BC, right around the end of the last ice age, right when sea levels were rising dramatically, right when, according to geology, massive floods would have inundated coastal regions worldwide. Here is what most people do not know. In the Sahara Desert in Mauritania, there is a geological formation called the Richat structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara. From space, it looks like a giant bullseye, concentric rings, just like Plato described. The dimensions almost exactly match Plato's measurements for Atlantis when converted from ancient Greek units. Geologists say it is a natural formation, an eroded dome, and maybe they are right, but the coincidence is striking, and recent evidence suggests the area was much wetter in the past, with flowing rivers and possibly even access to the ocean. I am not saying the Richat structure is definitely Atlantis, but I am saying that dismissing Plato's account entirely, treating it as pure fiction, might be premature, especially when he got so many other historical details correct in his writings. The establishment response to all of this evidence is fascinating. They call it pseudo-archaeology. They say people like Graham Hancock, who has spent decades researching these connections, are spreading misinformation. They attack the messenger instead of addressing the message. But here is what they cannot explain. They cannot explain the identical construction techniques across continents. They cannot explain the cocaine in Egyptian mummies. They cannot explain how the Piri Reis map shows Antarctica without ice. They cannot explain Göbekli Tepe or the Antikythera mechanism or the dozens of other artifacts that do not fit the approved timeline. Instead, they ignore it. They file it away. They discourage young archaeologists from asking uncomfortable questions because those questions might derail their careers. There are rumors, persistent rumors, that the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. has suppressed evidence over the years. Reports from the 1800s and early 1900s describe discoveries of giant skeletons, advanced artifacts, and out-of-place objects that were sent to the Smithsonian and subsequently disappeared, lost in the archives, misplaced, or according to some, deliberately destroyed. Now, I cannot prove those claims. The Smithsonian denies them. But I can tell you this. Institutions protect their narratives. Museums have political pressures. Funding depends on maintaining certain stories. And when evidence threatens those stories, it becomes inconvenient. And inconvenient evidence has a way of vanishing. The Vatican Library is another mystery. It is one of the oldest and most important libraries in the world, with over 1 million books and 75,000 manuscripts. But large sections remain closed to outside researchers. What is in those archives? What ancient texts? What historical documents? What knowledge from past civilizations might be locked away? Again, I am not claiming conspiracy, but I am pointing out that access to information is controlled, and those who control information control the past, and whoever controls the past controls the future. What we are looking at is not a series of coincidences, it is a pattern. A global pattern that suggests human civilization is far older and far more connected than we have been taught. There was a time, before the floods, before the catastrophe, when the world was united, when knowledge flowed freely, when ships crossed oceans and cultures exchanged ideas. And then something happened, something catastrophic, something that reset humanity back to zero. And we have spent the last 12,000 years slowly, painfully, clawing our way back to where we once were. I am curious, where are you listening from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment and let me know. I love seeing how this story reaches people across different continents, different time zones. Maybe you are having morning coffee in New York, or it is past midnight in Tokyo and you cannot sleep because these questions are keeping you up. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, we are all connected by these same mysteries that span the entire globe. The question is, what was that catastrophe? And can we prove it happened? That is where we go next. There is a layer of dirt that circles the entire planet. You can find it in ice cores from Greenland, in sediment from California, in soil samples from Syria, in the ground beneath your feet. No matter where you are standing right now, scientists call it the Younger Dryas boundary layer. And it tells the story of the day the world ended. 12,800 years ago, Earth was warming. The Ice Age was ending. Glaciers were retreating. Humans were spreading across continents, developing agriculture, building communities. Life was getting better. And then, in what might have been a matter of hours, everything changed. The temperature dropped, not gradually, not over centuries. We are talking about a temperature plunge of 15 degrees Celsius in less than a decade, maybe faster. The ice stopped melting. In some places, it started advancing again. This cold snap lasted for almost 1,300 years. Geologists call it the Younger Dryas period, named after an Arctic wildflower that suddenly appears in the fossil record across Europe during this time. For most of the 20th century, scientists debated what caused this sudden freeze. Some thought it was changes in ocean currents. Others suggested volcanic activity. The explanations were neat, academic, and completely unsatisfying, because none of them could account for the violence written in the geological record. Then, in 2007, a team of scientists led by Richard Firestone published a paper that changed everything. They had found something in that boundary layer, something that should not be there. Nanodiamonds. Stay with me here, because this is crucial. Nanodiamonds only form under extreme heat and pressure. We are talking temperatures over 2,000 degrees Celsius, the kind of heat you get from nuclear explosions or cosmic impacts. These microscopic diamonds were scattered across North America, Europe, and Asia, all in the same thin layer of sediment dating to exactly 12,800 years ago. But the nanodiamonds were just the beginning. That same layer contained high concentrations of iridium, a rare element more common in asteroids than Earth's crust. It contained spherules, tiny glass beads formed when rock melts and cools rapidly in the air. It contained soot, massive amounts of soot, suggesting continent-scale wildfires, and it contained shocked quartz, a mineral structure that only forms during meteor impacts or nuclear detonations. The evidence was pointing to one conclusion: something from space hit Earth, something big enough to trigger global catastrophe. The Comet Research Group, as this team of scientists came to be known, proposed that a comet fractured as it entered the inner solar system. Multiple fragments, each potentially miles across, slammed into the North American ice sheet. The impacts vaporized trillions of tons of ice instantly. The shockwaves triggered earthquakes. The heat ignited forests across an entire continent. The debris thrown into the atmosphere blocked out the sun. And the water from those vaporized glaciers? That became rain. 40 days and 40 nights of rain, if you want to use biblical terminology. Enough rain to raise global sea levels by hundreds of feet. Enough water to drown every coastal civilization on Earth. Mainstream science resisted this theory, viciously. They demanded more proof. They questioned the dating. They suggested alternative explanations for each piece of evidence. And to be fair, that is how science should work. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So, the Comet Research Group kept digging, and the evidence kept mounting. In 2013, they found a massive impact crater beneath the Hiawatha Glacier in Greenland. It is 19 miles wide, hidden under ice, perfectly preserved. The dating? Younger Dryas period. The crater shows all the characteristics of a high-speed cosmic impact, the kind that would have had hemispheric effects. But one crater was not enough to explain the global distribution of impact materials, so they kept looking. In 2019, they found a second crater, also in Greenland, also beneath the ice. Then evidence of impacts in Michigan, in South Carolina, possible airburst sites across North America where fragments exploded in the atmosphere like the Tunguska event in 1908, but far larger. The picture that emerged was terrifying. Not a single impact, but a barrage. Multiple fragments from a disintegrating comet, each carrying the destructive power of thousands of nuclear weapons, hitting Earth over the course of perhaps a few hours. The northern hemisphere would have been devastated instantly. The southern hemisphere would have suffered the environmental collapse that followed. Let me put this in perspective. The asteroid that killed the dinosaurs 65 million years ago was about 6 miles wide. It created a crater 112 miles across and triggered a mass extinction. The Younger Dryas impacts were probably smaller individually, but there were many of them, and they hit an ice-covered landscape. The explosive vaporization of glacial ice would have amplified the destruction far beyond what a similar impact on bare rock would have caused. And here's the thing that keeps researchers up at night. The parent comet might still be out there. Fragmented, yes, but still orbiting through our solar system. Every few thousand years, Earth might pass through the debris field left behind. The torrid meteor stream, which we pass through twice every year, contains objects large enough to be dangerous. Some astronomers have calculated that we might be entering a more dense region of this stream in the coming decades. History might not just rhyme, it might repeat. But let us get back to 12,800 years ago. Imagine you are a human living on the coast of what is now the Gulf of Mexico. Your people have lived here for generations. You have villages, agriculture, trade networks. You are not cavemen. You are not primitive. You have knowledge passed down from your ancestors, perhaps even survivors from an earlier catastrophe. It is early morning. The sun is rising. Then the sky lights up brighter than day. A streak of fire, wider than the sun itself, tears across the heavens. The sound comes seconds later, a roar that shatters the air, that you feel in your bones, in your chest, that ruptures eardrums and stops hearts. The ground heaves. The horizon erupts in fire. A wall of superheated steam and debris, hundreds of feet tall, races toward you faster than any animal can run. There is no time to think, no time to gather belongings. You run inland, but the blast wave catches you, throws you like a leaf in a hurricane. If you survive the initial impact, you face the fires. The entire forest ignites simultaneously. The air itself seems to burn. Then comes the water. The tsunami, generated by vaporized ice and displaced ocean, rolls across the coastal plains. Not a single wave, but a surge that keeps coming, that pushes miles inland, that drowns everything in its path. For those inland, away from the immediate devastation, the horror is just beginning. The sun disappears behind a curtain of dust and smoke. The temperature plummets. Crops fail. Animals die. Starvation follows. And this is not a bad season. This is 1,300 years of winter. The fossil record confirms this nightmare scenario. The megafauna of North America, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, woolly mammoths, mastodons, all went extinct right at the Younger Dryas boundary. Not gradually. Suddenly, we find their bones in mass graves, jumbled together with other species, evidence of catastrophic flooding and rapid burial. The Clovis people, one of the earliest widespread cultures in North America, vanished at this exact moment. Their distinctive spear points stop appearing in the archaeological record. The culture just ends. Later cultures that emerge show no cultural continuity with Clovis. It was a complete reset. But extinction was not limited to the Americas. Across the planet, 35 genera of large mammals disappeared. In Australia, the megafauna vanished. In Europe, populations crashed. This was a global die-off synchronized to a single event. And yet, some humans survived. Scattered groups, probably those who lived inland, away from coasts, in regions that were already cold and where people knew how to survive harsh conditions. They carried forward fragments of knowledge from the world before. Stories of gods who came from the sea, memories of great cities swallowed by water, warnings about fire from the sky. These stories became the myths we still tell today. The flood of Noah, the destruction of Atlantis, the Hindu texts describing Pralaya, the dissolution of the universe in water and fire, the Aboriginal Australian stories of the Dreamtime ending in catastrophe, the Hopi prophecies of previous worlds destroyed by ice and flood. We call them myths because we cannot imagine they are real. But geology does not lie. Ice cores do not lie. The nanodiamonds and the iridium and the soot layers do not lie. Something catastrophic happened, and it happened exactly when these ancient stories say it did. Sea level rise following the Younger Dryas was staggering. Over the course of a few thousand years, the oceans rose by 400 feet. That is the height of a 40-story building. Every coastal plain on Earth was inundated. Every river delta drowned. every port city destroyed. If you want to find the cities of the pre-flood world, you need to look underwater, and we are just beginning to do that. Off the coast of India, underwater surveys have found structures that appear artificial, lying beneath 300 feet of water. Off Japan, the Yonaguni Monument presents terraced platforms and right-angle cuts that many believe are too precise to be natural. Near Cuba, sonar has detected what look like megalithic structures a half-mile down. Mainstream archaeology dismisses these findings. They say the underwater formations are natural, that humans were not sophisticated enough to build in those locations, that the dating must be wrong, but they said the same thing about Göbekli Tepe before it was excavated. They said the same thing about the Younger Dryas impact theory before the evidence became overwhelming. The pattern is clear. Reject first, investigate later, accept only when denial becomes impossible. How many more cities are under the ocean? How much evidence of advanced pre-flood civilization lies buried beneath sediment on the continental shelves? We have better maps of Mars than we do of our own ocean floor. And what we are finding, in the tiny fraction we have surveyed, is already challenging the official story. The Younger Dryas was not just a climate anomaly. It was the reset button for human civilization. Everything that came before, the knowledge, the cities, the technology, was wiped away. The survivors had to start over, with nothing but memories and myths. And here we are, 12,000 years later, finally sophisticated enough to read the geological record, finally advanced enough to find the evidence, finally brave enough to ask the question, what if it happens again? Walk with me into the ruins of Pumapunku in Bolivia. We are standing at 13,000 feet above sea level, on a windswept plateau where the air is so thin you can barely breathe. Around us lie scattered stone blocks, weighing up to 130 tons each. And these are not rough-hewn boulders. These are precision-engineered components. Pick up any block here. Run your fingers along the edges. You will find surfaces flat to within a fraction of a millimeter. Perfect 90-degree angles. Intricate, interlocking grooves that look like they were milled by machine. Some blocks have channels cut into them with such precision that modern engineers compare them to circuit boards or computer components carved in stone. The material is red sandstone and andesite, some of the hardest stones on Earth. According to mainstream archaeology, the Tiwanaku people who lived here around 500 to 900 AD created these blocks using stone hammers and copper chisels. Copper, a soft metal that crumbles against hard stone. Let me tell you what modern stonemasons say when they examine Pumapunku. They say it cannot be done with ancient tools, not with copper, not with bronze, maybe not even with iron. The tolerances are too tight, the surface is too smooth, the angles too perfect. Several master craftsmen have attempted to replicate just one of these blocks using the tools the ancients supposedly had. After weeks of work, they produce something that looks vaguely similar from a distance. Up close? Not even in the same category. But the mystery gets deeper. These blocks were not just carved locally and assembled. Geological analysis shows the andesite came from quarries over 60 miles away, across Lake Titicaca. 60 miles. 130-ton blocks. Across a lake. Up a mountain. How? The conventional answer is ramps, rollers, thousands of workers, and decades of labor. But that answer assumes the blocks were rough cut at the quarry and then shaped on site. Except these blocks show no evidence of being worked after transport. They arrived finished, precision cut, ready to slot into place like enormous Lego pieces. Something is missing from our understanding. Either these people had technology we do not recognize, or they inherited these structures from someone else who did. Now let us jump across the planet to ancient Sumeria, to Egypt, to the Olmec civilization in Mexico. In the art and carvings of these completely separate cultures, separated by thousands of miles and supposed centuries of time, we find the same object appearing again and again. Researchers call it the mysterious handbag. Look at the Sumerian reliefs of the Anunnaki, their gods. Each figure holds a small rectangular box with a handle on top. It looks exactly like a modern handbag or a toolbox. Now look at Egyptian hieroglyphs. The gods carry the same object. Now look at Olmec carvings. Same thing. Now look at reliefs from Göbekli Tepe. There it is again. This is not a case of similar artistic styles evolving independently. These are identical representations of the same object appearing across continents and cultures that supposedly never met. What was in that bag? What tool or device was so important that it became a symbol of divine power across the ancient world? We do not know, but its repeated appearance suggests it was real, functional, and significant. Then we have the Temple of Hathor at Dendera in Egypt. On the walls of an underground crypt, there are relief carvings that have puzzled researchers for over a century. The images show large bulb-shaped objects, hollow inside, with wavy serpent-like lines running through them. These bulbs sit on pillar stands that look remarkably like insulators. Figures hold the bulbs using objects that resemble cables or conducting rods. Egyptologists say these are symbolic representations of creation myths, of the god Harsamtus emerging from a lotus flower, and maybe they are right. But in 1996, engineers Wolfgang Waitkus and Peter Krasa built a working model based on these reliefs. They created what is essentially a Crookes tube, an early electrical discharge lamp. It worked. The design in the reliefs, if interpreted as a technical schematic rather than mythology, produces functional electrical lighting. Now, I am not claiming the ancient Egyptians had light bulbs in the modern sense, but I am pointing out that dismissing these images as purely symbolic might be premature, especially when you consider the engineering problems the Egyptians faced. Inside the Great Pyramid, inside the tombs of the Valley of the Kings, we find elaborate paintings and carvings covering every surface. These spaces are deep underground, accessed through narrow passages where no natural light penetrates. According to official archaeology, the artists worked by the light of oil lamps or torches. But here is the problem. Burning oil lamps or torches in enclosed underground spaces produces soot, lots of it. Anyone who has lit a candle in a closed room knows how quickly smoke residue builds up. Yet the ceilings of these tombs show virtually no soot deposits. The paint is pristine. The colors remain vivid thousands of years later. How did they see? How did they work in absolute darkness without producing smoke? Mirrors reflecting sunlight through multiple passages, as some suggest. Try setting that up in the winding corridors of an Egyptian tomb and see how far your light reaches. The math does not work. The angles are wrong. The distance is too great. What if they had artificial light? What if the Dendera bulbs are not myth, but memory? A glimpse of technology that existed and was lost. Let us talk about the Iron Pillar of Delhi. Standing in the courtyard of the Qutb complex in India, this 23-foot-tall pillar has stood for over 1,600 years, possibly much longer. It weighs more than 6 tons and is made of 98% pure wrought iron. Here is what makes it impossible. It does not rust. Not in 16 centuries. Not in the monsoon rains of India. Not in the humidity and heat. The pillar has a thin protective coating of misawat, a compound of iron, oxygen, and hydrogen that has formed a crystalline barrier against corrosion. Modern metallurgists have studied this pillar extensively. They have tried to recreate the process that could produce such corrosion-resistant iron using ancient techniques. They have failed. The level of purity, the phosphorus content, the forging process required, all of it points to a sophistication in metallurgy that should not exist in the ancient world. Some researchers suggest the iron came from a meteorite, which would explain the purity, but that does not explain the forging process, the uniformity, or the protective coating. Whoever made this pillar understood material science at a level we are only now beginning to match. But perhaps the greatest loss of ancient knowledge came not from catastrophe, but from deliberate destruction. The Library of Alexandria in Egypt was one of the largest and most significant libraries of the ancient world. At its height, it contained somewhere between 400,000 and 1 million scrolls, works from every civilization known to the Mediterranean world. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, history, literature, and then it burned. Not once, but multiple times over several centuries. Julius Caesar's forces accidentally set fire to part of it in 48 BC. Christian mobs destroyed portions in the 4th century AD. Arab forces may have finished it off in the 7th century, though this is debated. What was lost? We will never know. We have fragments, references, and other texts to books that no longer exist. Entire works by historians, scientists, and philosophers, gone forever. The complete history of the ancient world, written by people who lived it, reduced to ash. But Alexandria was not alone. The Nalanda University Library in India, one of the greatest repositories of Buddhist, Hindu, and secular knowledge, was destroyed in 1193 AD by invading forces. It reportedly burned for 3 months. 9 million manuscripts gone. In China, the burning of books and burying of scholars under Emperor Qin Shi Huang in 213 BC destroyed countless texts from the Zhou dynasty and earlier periods. In Central America, Spanish conquistadors and Catholic priests systematically burned Mayan codices, the written records of an entire civilization. Bishop Diego de Landa personally oversaw the burning of thousands of Mayan books in 1562, stating they contained nothing but superstition and lies. Only 4 codices survived. 4 out of thousands. What knowledge did those books contain? What histories? What sciences? The Maya had sophisticated mathematics, including the concept of zero before it appeared in Europe. They had astronomical calendars more accurate than anything Europe would produce until the 20th century. What else did they know that we will never recover? This is not ancient history. This is systematic erasure of human knowledge. And it raises an uncomfortable question. How much of this destruction was accidental and how much was intentional? How much knowledge has been suppressed not by catastrophe, but by design? There are persistent stories, difficult to verify but impossible to ignore, about the Vatican's secret archives. Officially renamed the Vatican Apostolic Archives in 2019, this repository contains over 50 miles of shelving holding documents dating back over 1,000 years. Much of it is accessible to qualified researchers, but not all of it. What is in the sections that remain closed? Church records, certainly. Diplomatic papers, letters from monarchs. But could there be more? Ancient texts confiscated during the Crusades? Documents deemed heretical and hidden away? Evidence of historical events the Church wanted forgotten? I cannot prove any of this. The Vatican is under no obligation to open its private archives, but the secrecy fuels speculation. And when institutions control access to historical documents, they control the narrative of history itself. Similarly, the Smithsonian Institution has faced accusations for over a century of suppressing archaeological evidence. Reports from the 1800s, published in newspapers and local historical societies, describe discoveries that never made it into official records. Skeletons of unusual size found in burial mounds across the American Midwest and East Coast, artifacts that did not fit established timelines, objects sent to the Smithsonian that were never cataloged, never displayed, and seemingly vanished. The Smithsonian denies any suppression. They say these claims are based on misidentifications, hoaxes, or normal errors in 19th century archaeology. And perhaps they are right, but the pattern of missing evidence, of discoveries that disappear after being sent to official institutions, appears too often to dismiss entirely. Whether through catastrophe, conquest, or conspiracy, the result is the same. We are living with fragments, pieces of a puzzle so large we cannot see the whole picture. The technologies of the past, the knowledge systems, the scientific understanding, most of it is gone. And what remains is so fragmented, so distorted by time and translation, that we can barely recognize it for what it was. But every so often, something survives. A pillar that does not rust, a map that shows impossible knowledge, a mechanism too advanced for its time, a carving that looks like technology. And we are left wondering, not what they could do with stone and copper, but what they could do before the stones and copper were all that remained. If you are finding these mysteries as compelling as I am, if you want to keep exploring these lost technologies and forgotten knowledge with me, consider subscribing to Tales Before Tesla. Hit that notification bell so you do not miss when we uncover the next piece of this puzzle. And if you have thoughts about what we have covered, or your own theories about these ancient technologies, I would genuinely love to hear them in the comments. This is not just my investigation, it is ours. Now, the lost technologies are one thing, but what about the people who survived the catastrophe? The ones who carried forward the memories of what came before? Their stories might be the most important evidence of all. Sit with me for a moment in the high desert of Arizona. The sun is setting over the mesas, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. An elder of the Hopi people is speaking, his weathered hands gesturing to the horizon. He tells you that this is the fourth world, that 3 worlds came before, each destroyed when humanity lost its way. The first world was consumed by fire from below. The second world was destroyed when the earth tipped over and ice covered everything. The third world ended in a great flood. You might smile politely, thinking these are just stories. Mythology, the kind of tale every culture tells to explain natural disasters they do not understand. But then the elder describes something specific. He talks about how his ancestors emerged from the third world through a sipapu, a hole in the earth, carrying with them the knowledge of the ones who came before. He describes star beings who taught them agriculture, architecture, how to live in harmony with the land. He mentions specific locations where the ancient ones built cities in the cliffs, preserving what they could of the old knowledge. And suddenly, you realize he is not speaking in metaphor. He is recounting history. The Hopi are not alone. Across the Pacific, the Maori people of New Zealand tell of arriving in their homeland after a great voyage from a place called Hawaii, a sophisticated motherland that sank beneath the waves. They describe their ancestors as master navigators who could read the stars, the currents, the flight patterns of birds, who crossed thousands of miles of open ocean using knowledge passed down through generations. In Australia, Aboriginal oral traditions speak of a time when the coastline was different, when you could walk to what are now islands, when the sea was lower. Western scientists dismissed these stories as fantasy until marine archaeology confirmed that yes, during the last ice age, Australia was connected to Tasmania and New Guinea by land bridges. The Aboriginal people had preserved accurate geographical information for over 12,000 years through nothing but spoken word. That number should stagger you. 12,000 years. 400 generations of people keeping a story alive, unchanged enough that when we finally check it with modern science, it holds true. What else are they remembering? In the Amazon rainforest, indigenous tribes speak of a time before the forest, when their ancestors lived in great cities. Until recently, archaeologists insisted the Amazon could never have supported large civilizations. The soil is too poor, they said. The environment too harsh. But then, satellite imaging and LiDAR technology revealed the truth. Beneath the jungle canopy lie the remains of vast urban complexes, earthworks, geometric patterns stretching for miles, evidence of sophisticated agriculture and engineering. The tribes were right all along. Travel to India and open the ancient Vedic texts. The Mahabharata, the Ramayana, these are not just religious scriptures. Read them carefully and you find descriptions that sound disturbingly like technology. The Vimana, flying machines that could travel between cities or even to other worlds. Weapons called Brahmastra that could destroy entire armies, that produced light brighter than 1,000 suns, that made hair and nails fall out, that poisoned food and water. That last detail should give you chills, because that sounds exactly like radiation poisoning. For centuries, Western scholars read these texts and saw only mythology, primitive people making up stories about gods with magical powers. But what if these were not gods? What if these were memories, distorted by time and cultural interpretation, of actual people with actual technology? What if the Vimana were aircraft and the Brahmastra were weapons from a civilization that destroyed itself in war? Sanskrit scholars will tell you the descriptions in these texts are incredibly specific. They include details about propulsion, navigation, the materials used in construction. The Vaimanika Shastra, a 4th century BC text, contains what appear to be technical specifications for building flying machines. Skeptics say it is a 20th century forgery, and parts of it might be, but the text references earlier sources, manuscripts that are undeniably ancient. Dismissing all of it as fantasy requires ignoring a lot of specific, consistent detail across multiple independent sources. Now, turn your attention to the Sphinx. This massive lion-bodied, human-headed statue has gazed across the Giza Plateau for thousands of years. Egyptologists date it to around 2500 BC, built during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. But there is a problem with this dating. A big problem. The Sphinx shows extensive erosion, deep vertical channels cut into its body. The pattern of weathering is unmistakable to geologists. It is water erosion, Not wind erosion, which creates horizontal patterns. Not sand erosion, which would affect all surfaces equally. This is heavy rainfall erosion, the kind that requires centuries of exposure to intense precipitation. But Egypt has been a desert for over 5,000 years. The kind of rainfall needed to create this erosion pattern has not occurred in the region since the end of the last ice age, since around 10,000 BC or earlier. Geologist Robert Schoch examined the Sphinx in the early 1990s and concluded that the structure must be at least 9,000 years old, possibly much older. The archaeological establishment attacked him relentlessly. They said he was misinterpreting the geology. They offered alternative explanations involving groundwater, chemical erosion, anything to avoid the obvious conclusion. But Schoch stood by his findings, and other geologists who have examined the evidence agree with him. The weathering patterns are consistent with water erosion during a period when Egypt had a much wetter climate, which means the Sphinx predates ancient Egypt, which means it was built by someone else. The ancient Egyptians themselves might have been telling us this all along. In their own texts, they reference the Zep Tepi, the first time, an age of gods who ruled before the pharaohs. They describe this era as a golden age of knowledge and power, brought to an end by catastrophe. The Edfu building texts, inscribed on the walls of the Temple of Horus, describe how survivors of a destroyed homeland came to Egypt and established their civilization, bringing with them the knowledge of the ancients. The pharaohs did not claim to have invented Egyptian civilization. They claimed to be inheritors of it, preservers of knowledge passed down from the ones who came before. This is why the Great Pyramid contains such sophisticated mathematics and astronomy. This is why Egyptian medicine, at the very beginning of their historical period, was already highly advanced, and then declined over time. They were not discovering knowledge, they were losing it, trying to maintain what the earlier culture had given them, but lacking the full understanding to do so. Underneath the Giza Plateau, ground-penetrating radar has detected voids, chambers, tunnels that have never been excavated. The Egyptian government has resisted opening them. Why? Officially, to preserve the site, to prevent damage. But some researchers wonder if there is another reason. If those chambers contain evidence that contradicts the official timeline, evidence that would force a rewriting of history so fundamental it would shake the foundations of archaeology itself. The ancient Maya left us another clue, encoded in their long count calendar. This calendar, incredibly complex and astonishingly accurate, tracked cycles within cycles. The smallest cycle was a day. The largest was approximately 5,125 years, called a Baktun. 13 Baktuns completed one great cycle of about 5,125 years. On December 21st, 2012, a great cycle ended. You probably remember the hysteria about the world ending. It did not, obviously, but the Maya never said it would. What they said was that the completion of a great cycle represented a transition, a shift from one world age to another, and they indicated this had happened before, that previous worlds had ended and new ones begun. How did they know? How did a supposedly Stone Age culture develop a calendar that could track celestial mechanics over thousands of years? The Maya could predict solar eclipses with precision. They calculated the synodic period of Venus to within hours over centuries of observation. They understood that the Earth wobbled on its axis, a phenomenon called precession that takes 25,772 years to complete one cycle. They were tracking cosmic time, and they were marking the dangerous periods, the times when destruction had come before and might come again. In Peru, at the Nazca Desert, lines and geoglyphs cover nearly 200 square miles. Some are simple lines, others are elaborate figures, a spider, a monkey, a hummingbird. The largest are over 1,000 feet across. And here's the thing, you cannot see them from the ground. You can only see them from the air. Why would a culture without flight create artwork that can only be appreciated from above? The standard explanation is that they were ritual pathways, meant for the gods to see. But that explanation assumes the Nazca people could not fly. What if they could? What if they had balloons or gliders or knowledge inherited from those who did? Or what if the lines were not created by the Nazca at all? What if they found them, preserved them, used them, but did not build them? What if these were navigational markers from an earlier civilization that did have flight? I am not claiming ancient aliens. I am suggesting ancient humans with capabilities we have not credited them with. Because every time we assume the past was primitive, the evidence proves us wrong. The oral traditions, the myths, the texts, the structures, they are all pointing to the same conclusion. There were people before us who knew things we have only recently rediscovered. They tried to preserve that knowledge through stories, through monuments, through survivors who carried it forward. But time, catastrophe, and cultural change distorted the message. We are the descendants of those survivors. We carry fragments of their knowledge in our myths and legends. And now, finally, we have the tools to recognize those fragments for what they are, not fantasy, not mythology, but memory. Distorted, symbolized, mythologized, but rooted in something real. The question is whether we are willing to listen. Picture a young archaeologist, fresh out of graduate school, standing in a university office. She has just discovered something extraordinary at a dig site. Carbon dating that does not match the accepted timeline. Artifacts in a layer of sediment where they should not exist. Her hands are shaking as she presents her findings to her department head. He looks at the data. His expression darkens. Then he says something she will never forget. If you publish this, your career is over before it starts. This is not a hypothetical scenario. This happens more often than you might think. The academic world runs on a currency more valuable than money: reputation, peer review, published papers, tenure, grants, and all of it depends on staying within acceptable boundaries of interpretation. Step outside those boundaries, even with solid evidence, and you become radioactive. Journals will not publish your work. Conferences will not invite you to speak. Funding evaporates. Colleagues distance themselves. You do not get fired for challenging the paradigm. You simply cease to exist in academic terms. Graham Hancock knows this better than most. The British author and journalist has spent over 30 years researching ancient civilizations, compiling evidence of advanced pre-Ice Age cultures. His books have sold millions of copies. His Netflix series has been watched by tens of millions of people worldwide, and the archaeological establishment despises him with a passion that borders on obsessive. They do not just disagree with his conclusions, they attack his character. They call him a pseudoscientist, a charlatan, dangerous. The Society for American Archaeology published an open letter demanding Netflix reclassify his series from documentary to fiction or entertainment. Not because his facts are wrong. Many of his facts come directly from peer-reviewed research, but because his interpretation threatens the standard model. Here is what makes this fascinating. Hancock does not claim to have all the answers. He presents evidence and asks questions. He says repeatedly that he might be wrong, that this is a hypothesis requiring more research, but that measured approach does not matter. To the establishment, questioning the timeline of civilization is heresy, and heretics must be burned. Why such fierce resistance? Let us follow the incentives. Academia is a pyramid scheme of credibility. Professors build their entire careers on specific interpretations of history. They write textbooks. They train graduate students. They serve on committees that decide what gets published and what gets funding. Their professional legacy depends on their interpretation being correct. Now, imagine evidence emerges that fundamentally contradicts their life's work. That suggests civilization is thousands of years older than they taught, that the timeline they defended for decades is wrong. Do they embrace this new evidence? Do they thank the researcher who discovered it? Or do they fight it? Do they protect their legacy, their textbooks, their students, the edifice of knowledge they built their reputation upon? Human nature suggests the latter, and academic history confirms it. Plate tectonics, the theory that continents move, was ridiculed and rejected for decades. Alfred Wegener, who proposed it in 1912, was mocked by the geological establishment until his death. It took 40 years and mountains of evidence before the theory was accepted. The scientists who built their careers on static continents, they never admitted they were wrong. They just died, and the next generation accepted the new paradigm. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is following a similar trajectory. When the Comet Research Group first published their findings in 2007, mainstream geology reacted with hostility. They demanded impossible standards of proof. They published papers attacking the methodology. They suggested the nanodiamonds could be explained by wildfires, even though wildfires do not produce nanodiamonds. But here is what happened next. More evidence emerged. The Hiawatha crater, the second Greenland crater, impact proxies found in dozens of locations worldwide. Slowly, grudgingly, some mainstream scientists began admitting that maybe, possibly, an impact event occurred. The resistance is weakening. But it took 15 years of brutal academic warfare to get here. 15 years during which researchers faced career damage for pursuing this line of investigation. How much faster would progress have been if the establishment had said, "Interesting hypothesis, let us investigate it properly," instead of, "This contradicts what we believe, therefore it must be wrong." But career protection is only part of the story. There are deeper institutional interests at play. Tourism is a multi-billion-dollar industry built on ancient sites. Egypt's economy depends heavily on visitors to the pyramids and temples. The official narrative, that these were built by pharaohs around 2500 BC, is carefully curated and marketed. If researchers conclusively prove the Sphinx is 12,000 years old, built by a pre-Egyptian civilization, how does that affect Egypt's cultural identity, their national pride, their tourism messaging? Suddenly, it is not just about archaeology. It is about politics and economics. The same applies to Mexico and Central America with Mayan and Aztec sites, to Peru with Incan monuments, to China with their ancient dynasties. National identity is often built on archaeological heritage. Rewriting that heritage threatens more than academic theories. It threatens how nations see themselves. Religious institutions have their own reasons for preferring the standard timeline. Young Earth creationists aside, most mainstream religious scholars have reconciled their beliefs with conventional archaeology. The timeline works. The story fits. But push civilization back to 15,000 years ago, and suddenly biblical chronology becomes problematic. Not impossible to reconcile, but uncomfortable. The Vatican has one of the world's largest collections of ancient documents. We talked earlier about the Vatican Apostolic Archives. Over 1,000 years of accumulated texts, letters, confiscated manuscripts. Researchers can access much of it, but not all. And the process for gaining access is deliberately opaque. Am I suggesting the Vatican is hiding proof of ancient advanced civilizations? No, that would be speculation without evidence. But am I suggesting institutions that control historical documents have motivations beyond pure academic truth? Absolutely. Throughout history, those who control information control the narrative, and controlling the narrative means controlling power. The Smithsonian situation is murkier and more frustrating. Unlike the Vatican, which is private and owes no one access, the Smithsonian is a public institution funded by American taxpayers. Yet accusations of suppressed evidence have dogged the institution since the 1800s. Newspaper accounts from that era describe discoveries sent to the Smithsonian that were never cataloged. Reports of unusually large skeletal remains found in Native American burial mounds, dutifully shipped to Washington for analysis, and then disappearing into the archives. When researchers inquire about these specimens, they are told records were lost, or the artifacts were misidentified, or they never existed in the first place. Now, to be fair, record-keeping in the late 1800s was not what it is today. Objects did get lost, reports were exaggerated. Newspapers printed sensational stories without proper verification. Much of what is claimed about Smithsonian suppression probably is misunderstanding or hoax. But all of it, the pattern appears too consistent, too widespread across different time periods and locations to dismiss entirely. In 1993, a group of researchers filed a Freedom of Information Act request seeking records of giant skeletal remains. The Smithsonian's response was that no such records exist. Not that the claims were false, not that the remains were normal-sized humans misidentified, but that the records themselves do not exist. For an institution that prides itself on meticulous documentation, that is a curious answer. Here is the uncomfortable truth. We want to believe in the integrity of scientific institutions. We want to trust that museums, universities, and research organizations pursue truth objectively. And mostly, they do. Most scientists are honest, dedicated people trying to understand the world. But institutions are made of humans, and humans have biases, ambitions, fears. They protect their careers, they defend their beliefs, they serve political and economic masters, and sometimes, consciously or unconsciously, they suppress information that threatens the stability of the system they are part of. This does not require conspiracy. It does not need shadowy cabals meeting in secret. It just requires normal human incentives playing out across interconnected institutions. A grant committee deciding not to fund controversial research. A journal editor rejecting a paper that challenges established chronology. A museum choosing not to display artifacts that complicate the official story. A university denying tenure to someone who asks uncomfortable questions. Each decision, individually, seems reasonable. Protecting academic standards. Maintaining quality control. But collectively, these decisions create an environment where certain ideas cannot be explored, certain questions cannot be asked, certain evidence cannot be acknowledged. And over time, this becomes self-reinforcing. Students learn what topics are safe and what topics are career suicide. They internalize the boundaries. By the time they become professors, they genuinely believe the heterodox ideas are wrong, not because they examined the evidence, but because they learned not to examine it. This is why breakthrough discoveries often come from outsiders. People without academic careers to protect. People willing to look at evidence without the burden of institutional orthodoxy. Hancock is a journalist, not an archaeologist. Robert Schoch, who dated the Sphinx using geology, faced opposition from Egyptologists protecting their discipline. The Comet Research Group includes scientists from multiple fields deliberately avoiding purely archaeological interpretation. Pattern recognition matters, and sometimes, the pattern is clearer when you are not invested in the existing framework. None of this means every alternative theory is correct. Most are probably wrong. Extraordinary claims do require extraordinary evidence. Rigorous methodology matters. Peer review, despite its flaws, is better than no review. But we need to acknowledge that resistance to new evidence is not always about protecting truth. Sometimes it is about protecting territory, reputation, and institutional power. And when that happens, progress stalls. Evidence gets buried, not in vaults, but in academic indifference. The price we pay is measured in lost knowledge, questions not asked, discoveries not made, understanding delayed by generations, and the nagging suspicion that we are not learning about the past as much as we are being told a version of it that serves present interests. Truth is not found by defending orthodoxy. It is found by challenging it, carefully and rigorously, but relentlessly, even when the challenge is uncomfortable. Especially then, technology is rewriting history faster than textbooks can keep up. In 2018, archaeologists flew a LiDAR-equipped aircraft over the jungles of Guatemala. Light detection and ranging, for those unfamiliar, uses laser pulses to map terrain beneath vegetation. The lasers penetrate the jungle canopy, bounce off the ground, and create detailed three-dimensional maps of whatever lies hidden below. What they found changed everything we thought we knew about the Maya. Beneath the jungle, invisible from ground level, the LiDAR revealed over 60,000 structures. Not scattered villages, not small settlements, an interconnected urban civilization covering over 800 square miles. Pyramids, palaces, elevated highways, agricultural terraces, irrigation systems, fortified walls. The Maya were not isolated city-states struggling in the jungle. They were a sophisticated empire supporting millions of people with infrastructure that rivals modern urban planning. And we had no idea it was there. We walked past it for centuries, looked right at jungle-covered hills and saw nothing but wilderness. How much more are we missing? How many other civilizations lie hidden under forest, desert, or ocean, waiting for the right technology to reveal them? LiDAR is now being deployed worldwide. In Cambodia, it has revealed massive extensions to Angkor Wat, showing the temple was part of a vast urban complex. In Honduras, it discovered Ciudad Blanca, the legendary White City, confirming local legends that archaeologists dismissed as myth. In England, it has found thousands of previously unknown archaeological sites buried under farmland and forests. Every time we scan a new area, we find more than expected, larger than expected, older than expected. more sophisticated than expected. The technology is humbling us, showing us how little we actually knew. At Giza, muon tomography is doing something equally revolutionary. Muons are subatomic particles created when cosmic rays hit Earth's atmosphere. They pass through solid matter, but they slow down depending on density. By placing detectors around a structure and measuring muon penetration from different angles, scientists can create maps of internal spaces without drilling or excavating. In 2017, the Scan Pyramids project used this technology on the Great Pyramid. They found a massive void, a previously unknown chamber over 100 feet long, sitting above the Grand Gallery. It has been sealed for 4,500 years. No one knows what is inside. No one knows how to access it without potentially damaging the pyramid. But we know it exists. Ground-penetrating radar has detected more anomalies. Chambers beneath the Sphinx, tunnels under the Giza Plateau, spaces that do not match any known architecture or any official plans. The Egyptian government has resisted opening them. The reasons given are preservation concerns, which are valid. But the delay feeds speculation. What are they waiting for? What do they expect to find? Or perhaps, what do they fear finding? Meanwhile, in Indonesia, a team of geologists has been studying Gunung Padang, a terraced hill in West Java covered in ancient megalithic structures. Surface archaeology dates the visible structures to around 5000 BC, but ground-penetrating radar and seismic tomography reveal something astonishing. The hill is not natural, it is artificial. Layer upon layer of constructed chambers buried under soil and vegetation. The deeper layers show signs of sophisticated engineering, columns, walls, internal spaces. And the dating of these deeper layers, using multiple methods including radiocarbon dating of organic materials found in the construction, pushes back to potentially 20,000 years ago or more. If confirmed, Gunung Padang would be the oldest megalithic site on Earth by a massive margin. Older than Göbekli Tepe, older than anything in the accepted timeline of human civilization. The Indonesian government has embraced the research, even featured it in national media. But international archaeology has been skeptical, demanding more rigorous dating and more peer-reviewed studies. That skepticism is fair. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, but the preliminary evidence is compelling enough that dismissing it outright seems premature. Ancient DNA is opening another window into the past. We can now extract genetic material from bones thousands of years old and trace human migration patterns with precision that was impossible a decade ago. And the picture that emerges is messy, complicated, not the neat, linear progression from Africa outward that textbooks presented. We are finding evidence of population movements that make no sense under the old model, genetic markers showing up in unexpected places, connections between populations separated by vast oceans. In 2015, DNA analysis of ancient skeletons from the Pacific Islands revealed genetic contributions from South America. Polynesians and Native Americans share ancestry. They met, they mixed, thousands of years before Columbus. The only explanation is trans-Pacific voyaging, regular enough contact for genetic exchange. In 2018, analysis of ancient Egyptian mummies confirmed the presence of sub-Saharan African, Middle Eastern, and surprisingly, traces of European genetic markers in populations dating back over 3,000 years. Egypt was not isolated. It was a crossroads, connected to trade networks spanning continents. Then there are the Denisovans, a human species we only discovered in 2010 from a finger bone found in a Siberian cave. DNA analysis revealed they were not Neanderthals, not Homo sapiens, something else. And their genes show up in modern populations across Asia, Melanesia, and Australia. They interbred with our ancestors. They were sophisticated enough to create jewelry, art, possibly even symbolic thought. How many other human species or subspecies existed that we have not found yet? How complex was the human family tree during the Ice Age? We assumed for decades that Neanderthals were brutish, less intelligent than Homo sapiens. Then we found Neanderthal cave art, musical instruments, burial sites with flowers and grave goods suggesting ritual belief, evidence of language capability. Suddenly, Neanderthals were not inferior cousins. They were parallel humans, equally complex, who simply lost the evolutionary lottery? What if some of the structures we attribute to early Homo sapiens were actually built by Neanderthals, Denisovans, or other human species? What if the primitive early humans were not primitive at all, just different? Satellite archaeology is revealing patterns invisible from the ground. Using multispectral imaging, infrared detection, and synthetic aperture radar, researchers can identify buried structures by detecting differences in soil composition, moisture retention, and vegetation growth. In Egypt, satellites have detected 17 lost pyramids, over 1,000 tombs, and 3,000 ancient settlements. In Peru, they have found new Nazca lines and geoglyphs that were completely unknown. In Iraq, satellites mapped the ancient Sumerian city of Ur and surrounding settlements, revealing urban planning far more extensive than ground surveys suggested. What is particularly interesting is finding evidence of catastrophic destruction, layers of sediment showing rapid flooding, burn layers indicating massive fires, impact debris scattered across regions. The geological and archaeological records are converging, confirming that something violent happened at the end of the Ice Age. Oceanography is perhaps the most promising frontier. 70% of Earth's surface is ocean. During the Ice Age, when sea levels were 400 feet lower, the coastlines were completely different. Vast plains, river valleys, and coastal regions where humans likely lived are now underwater. We have surveyed less than 5% of the ocean floor in high resolution, less than 5%, and in that tiny fraction, we are already finding anomalies. Off the coast of India near Gujarat, side-scan sonar detected structures resembling city ruins under 120 feet of water. Geometric patterns, right angles, organized layouts. Dating of artifacts recovered from the site suggests they are over 9,000 years old. Off Japan, the Yonaguni Monument presents terraces, steps, and carved surfaces that many researchers believe are too regular to be natural rock formations. Geologists debate whether it is artificial or a natural formation modified by humans. Either way, it has been underwater since the end of the Ice Age. Near Cuba, in 2001, sonar detected structures at a depth of over 2,000 feet. Granite blocks arranged in geometric patterns resembling pyramids and other buildings. The depth is problematic. For structures to be that deep, they would have to be over 50,000 years old. That is so far outside accepted chronology that most archaeologists simply ignore the findings. But what if chronology is wrong? What if sophisticated humans existed far earlier than we think, built on coastlines now submerged, and most of their civilization is underwater, unexplored, waiting to be found? We are living through a revolution in archaeology. Technology is revealing what was always there but hidden. LiDAR sees through jungles. Muon tomography sees through stone. Satellites see patterns from space. DNA reveals connections across oceans. Ground-penetrating radar maps the underworld. Every new scan, every new survey, every new test reveals more complexity, more sophistication, more questions. The old model of linear human development from primitive to advanced is crumbling. The evidence points to something different: cycles, rises and falls. Civilizations that achieved sophistication were destroyed and left fragments that later cultures built upon. We are not discovering history, we are rediscovering it, and the more we look with honest eyes and open minds, the clearer it becomes. We have been here before, we have built before, we have known before, and we have lost it all before. The real question is not whether advanced pre-Ice Age civilizations existed. The technology is answering that question for us. The real question is what we do with that knowledge now. There is a photograph that astronauts often describe as life-changing. It is called Earthrise. Taken from lunar orbit in 1968, it shows our planet rising over the barren moon, a blue and white marble suspended in the darkness of space. Fragile, isolated, beautiful. From that distance, you cannot see borders. You cannot see nations or religions or the things we fight about. You see one world, one home, and you realize how small it is, how vulnerable. Every astronaut who has seen Earth from space reports the same feeling, a sudden understanding that we are all connected, that the atmosphere protecting us is thinner than the skin of an apple, that everything humanity has ever done, every empire, Every achievement, every disaster, happened on that tiny sphere floating in an infinite void. Now imagine that photograph taken 12,000 years ago. Same planet, same fragility, different civilizations. And in one catastrophic moment, perhaps lasting only hours, most of them were erased. That is not ancient history. That is a preview. We have spent this journey following evidence. Stone that should not have been cut, maps that should not exist, technologies lost and rediscovered, myths that turned out to be memories, the geological scars of impact and flood, the genetic traces of maritime contact, the satellite images revealing hidden cities, the DNA showing we were never as isolated as we believed. Every piece of evidence points to the same conclusion. Human beings have been sophisticated for far longer than we acknowledge. We have risen before. We have built wonders. We have achieved knowledge. And we have lost everything. Not once, multiple times. The Hopi say this is the fourth world. Hindu texts describe cycles of creation and destruction spanning millions of years. The Maya track time in vast wheels, marking the dangerous transitions. Aboriginal Australians speak of multiple ages, each ending in catastrophe. These stories come from every inhabited continent. Different languages, different symbols, same message. Civilizations fall, knowledge is forgotten, and survivors have to begin again. Why does this matter now? Why spend 90 minutes exploring ruins and ancient texts and geological mysteries? Because we are approaching another transition point. Climate scientists tell us we are changing Earth's atmosphere faster than any natural process except major volcanic eruptions or asteroid impacts. Ice sheets are melting, sea levels are rising, weather patterns are shifting. We know this, we see it happening. And yet, as a species, we continue the same behaviors that are causing it. We are not the first to ignore warning signs. Astronomers track near-Earth objects, asteroids and comets that cross our orbital path. Most are small. Some are large enough to be civilization enders. We have identified many of them, but not all. The Chelyabinsk meteor that exploded over Russia in 2013 was not detected before it arrived. It was only 50 feet across, and it released energy equivalent to 500 kilotons of TNT. Windows shattered across 6 cities. Over 1,500 people were injured. 50 feet. Now imagine something a mile across. We would have warning, probably years in advance. But would we have the technology, the coordination, the political will to do anything about it? Maybe. Or maybe we would argue about whose responsibility it is to act while the clock runs down. History suggests the latter. Solar storms present another threat. In 1859, the Carrington event, a massive solar flare, hit Earth. Telegraph systems failed. Operators received electric shocks. Auroras were visible near the equator. In 1859, we had minimal electrical infrastructure. If a similar event happened today, with our dependence on satellites, power grids, and electronic systems, the damage would be catastrophic. Estimates suggest it could take years to rebuild. Supply chains would collapse. Modern civilization would face a reset. NASA says the probability of a Carrington-level event in the next decade is roughly 12%. Not 0. 1 in 8. We are betting our entire technological civilization on good luck. But perhaps the most profound lesson from the forgotten world is not about external threats. It is about internal fragility. Every collapse in history, every fallen empire, every lost civilization happened because they could not adapt. They outgrew their resources. They destroyed their environment. They fragmented politically. They lost the knowledge that sustained them. The mechanisms of collapse are well documented. Resource depletion, environmental degradation, social inequality, political instability, loss of institutional memory. Sound familiar? We have more knowledge stored today than at any point in human history. But how much of it would survive a major disruption? How much is locked in digital formats dependent on functioning infrastructure? If the power goes out permanently, how many people could rebuild technology from scratch? Could you create antibiotics, smelt metal, grow crops without industrial agriculture? The answer for most of us is no. We have outsourced our knowledge to systems, and systems are fragile. The ancients knew this. They encoded knowledge in stone. They trained oral historians to memorize information across generations. They built monuments aligned to astronomical events, creating permanent calendars. They were not primitive, they were preparing for collapse, trying to preserve what mattered for whoever came after. We should be doing the same, not out of pessimism, but out of responsibility. There are projects underway. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault stores crop seeds in an Arctic mountain. The Longnau Foundation is building a clock designed to run for 10,000 years. The Human Document Project is creating archives designed to survive civilizational collapse. These are good starts, but they are not enough. We need to think bigger. We need to encode essential knowledge in formats that will survive catastrophe. We need to teach people practical skills, not just specialized expertise. We need to rebuild communities that can function without global supply chains. We need to remember that we are mortal, not just individually, but collectively. This is not a call to despair. This is a call to humility and action. The forgotten world teaches us that nothing is guaranteed, that sophistication does not equal permanence, that 12,000 years from now, future archaeologists might be excavating our cities, puzzling over our technology, wondering what happened to us. What story do we want them to find? A civilization that knew the risks and ignored them? Or one that faced threats honestly and prepared for survival? The choice is ours. But the clock is ticking. It always has been. Before we end, I want to remind you that this exploration does not stop here. New discoveries are happening constantly. Technologies are revealing secrets monthly. If you want to continue this journey, to stay updated on the mysteries being uncovered, the evidence being found, the questions being asked, subscribe to Tales Before Tesla. Hit that bell icon. Join a community that values curiosity over certainty, that asks difficult questions, that refuses to accept simple answers to complex mysteries. We are all descendants of survivors. People who endured catastrophe, who preserved knowledge, who rebuilt from ashes. That resilience is in our DNA. That determination is our inheritance. The forgotten world is not gone. It lives in our myths, our monuments, our genes. It whispers warnings we should heed. It offers lessons we must learn. Will we listen? Will we prepare? Will we be the generation that breaks the cycle? Or will we become the next forgotten world, leaving future survivors to puzzle over our ruins and wonder why we did not act when we had the chance? The answer depends on what we do next. Starting now. Starting with you. The story is not over. It is just beginning again. The story is not over. It is just beginning again. And remember, the Taurid meteor stream? We enter its densest region in 2027. What will you do with the time we have left? Tell me in the comments. And if you want to know what we find next in the places they told us not to look, I will see you in the next investigation.